Hey guys, before I get into the feature presentation, I just have a quick question I wanted to ask you guys. Would you guys support, or do you think it's a good idea if during the week or 3 or 4 times looking at 3 or 4 different stories, I do these little gaming news commentary things where I play a game and I talk about the story and like go more in depth than other commentators and don't just regurgitate the shit that you hear on major gaming websites, but actually go and look for the sources and go and talk about the actual information in and of itself? Do you think that that would be a good idea? I'm just spitballing here. I'm just thinking that if that's the case and you guys will support that, I've got a hell of a lot of stories that I actually want to talk about that aren't going to be part of Dangerously Analyzed. They're just other things that came up. Now, without further ado, back to the presentation. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I am aware that tonight's topic is something that I've recently covered, and to some it may look like I am beating a dead horse, but bear in mind that this isn't an isolated case I'm dealing with here. Yes, once again I'm making a video on the topic of Mr. Repzion, but it's not so much about him as about the blatant lack of research and intellectual capacity that passes for an acceptable standard in the atheist community these days. Now, my own religious views are entirely irrelevant to the discussion. I do not wish to discuss them with anyone, as they are no one's business but my own, hence they are my views. All I will say is that I'm not an atheist and I'm not a theist, and leave it at that. You figure out what I am. But enough beating around the bush. What I'm here to talk about is a certain video published around 2 months ago, 3 months ago now, by Mr. Repzion, called The God That Fucked You Over. And when the video first came out, I pretty much ignored it until I stumbled upon information which I'm going to reveal to you in this video. You see, in that video he makes some pretty brash claims, which we will see are some of the most baseless and unsubstantiated drivel ever uttered on YouTube. So as a rough summary of the parts of the video I have a problem with, take a listen to what he said in the video in context.
On March 25th, 2009, while flying over the Sea of Sicily, a plane crashed. 16 people died. For 2 reasons. One of the reasons might have saved these people's lives. The first reason has to do with the plane's fuel gauge went out. And obviously that's going to cause a problem in the plane. The pilot, rather than taking emergency measures to save people, prayed. He paused and prayed for the duration of the plane going down. He has now been sentenced to a total of 10 years in prison for being responsible for the death of these 16 people, which he could have, perhaps, saved their lives. But because of prayer, because he took the time to pray in a time of need, innocent people died. You can probably guess where I'm going to be going with this video, because this video is to you Christians, to you religious folks out there.
Now, the main problem with this is that the whole neat little story of this pilot praying instead of taking emergency procedures, which could have saved lives, was a complete fantabulous fabrication, created and perpetuated by the new media, who latched onto a very small part of the story and amplified it and made it the whole of the story. So in order to prove Repzion wrong once and for all, I'm going to have to investigate these claims and get inside the story to show you how the Fifth Estate and the news media on the internet these days can distort the facts and spread misinformation that lingers for years. So first off, Mr. Repzion is wrong in that the story is very recent, which is what he claims. The incident actually occurred in 2005, and the convictions resulting from the accident only occurred in 2009. So Mr. Repzion is reading from an old story to begin with, and he gets this completely wrong. In fact, he gets this wrong in the first few seconds of the video.
On March 25th, 2009, while flying over the Sea of Sicily, a plane crashed.
So he's already shown that he knows nothing about what he's talking about, because the article he's referencing is over 4 years old. But of course it gets worse. So much more worse. So if you do a little digging and do some basic Google research, you actually turn up quite a lot of things. There are a few news articles out there which are listed down below, and an overall article on what happened to the flight, which actually provides a lot of answers that show that the pilot wasn't in as much error as Mr. Repsion's trying to say. And guess where that article comes from? Wikipedia. You could find that in about 10 seconds of Google research. Now, one of the things that quickly becomes apparent is the fact that the co-pilot and pilot of the plane were Muslims and not Christians, as Mr. Repsion implies, by addressing the video, of course, to Christians based on an example of two Muslims praying. Their names are Shafiq Gahabi and Ali Kaibir. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So how he got the idea that they were Christian is beyond me, unless he's conflating Muslims and Christians together somehow very ignorantly and ridiculously. In any event, him using the case of a Muslim to address Christians is just confusing in the very least. Now, as to the prayer thing itself, which is the most important aspect here. Where this comes from is a report by the BBC where witnesses say that the pilot flew into a blind panic and started praying instead of taking emergency procedures. Now that's a pretty convincing statement, but the main question is, how do we know that that's true? We don't have any sort of source on that, all we have is second-hand hearsay information. So, it would be kind of interesting if there was some sort of recording in the cockpit, you know, if some of that accidentally leaked. Oh wait, wouldn't you believe it, the last 4 minutes of the plane's audio from the cockpit before it ditched into the ocean was leaked and is available right here on YouTube. Now isn't that a happy coincidence? What I'm going to show you next is the raw and unedited 4 minutes of cockpit audio. I will put an annotation to skip this part of the video for people who don't want to listen to the whole recording, but for those of you who do, I want you to look out for signs of praying and not taking emergency procedures, which is exactly what Mr. Repsion accused the pilot of doing.
Confirm the distance, please. Confirm the distance, please. I think we are not able to reach the terrain. We are 4,000 feet and we are not able, we lose both engines. Can you send for us helicopters or something like that?
Preparation. Time prevent. ATC version notify. Cabin crew notify. Sign. On. GPWVS. Off. Not off mode. Cabin and cockpit door prepare.
شدور البط وذا يبرا أخي. شدور البط أخي.
حط له 60 زمان ده.
لا مش ريح قوية.
Cabin and cockpit prepare.
يا رب يطفف يا رب يطفف. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هذا شيء مدارج. Unable to reach 2,200 feet. There are two boats. I'm going to join them left side heading 180. Can you call them please? عودة وري عودة. أنا هو اللي دورته.
droit.
هيا لسي.
صحيح. خمسة.
ترى لك. There is a boat left side. I'm going to go there. 1,100 feet.
Auto press dump.
préparé pour an emergency kitchen. Unable to reach.
Unable to reach the noise. Repair 1153. We're unable to reach the field. We have two boats on the left side, a big boat. We will try to plan to ditch near of him. If you can call him, please. Before ditching, optimal pitch, attitude, minimize, impact slope. Brace for impact.
Okay.
Condition lever both better than future top.
طفش دلوقتي شيء ترى الاخر يا حسوا
شيء محبش يعمل شيء. Then the gear lever up, ditch push button before.
هاي سي هاي معي عليه. رد بالك معي. رد بالك حضر روحك يا شكري حضر روحك. أنا حاضر. On touche la mer.
So, what is being described in the audio is that the plane has run out of fuel and that neither of the engines are firing. The pilot is simultaneously advising the tower that they only have 3,000 to 4,000 feet of height before they hit whatever surface they're going to hit, and that they're going to have to ditch in the sea because they're not going to make it into an airport. He's also telling the co-pilot to keep trying the engines, and he's steering the plane at the same time, well calculating the maximum distance that they could glide given the current heading and pitch, and following all of the sea ditching procedures. He's doing all of that simultaneously under enormous pressure. As you can tell from the audio, he comes across as in control, calm and lucid, and is not panicking at all, with very occasional religious curses going on between what he's doing, which you can roughly interpret as, oh god, I please hope that we make it out of this alive, and nothing more than that. He's not praying, he's not stopping work, he's not pausing, he's doing his fucking job. But hey, don't take my word for it, listen to some of these people. From listening to the recording you can tell a great many things. For instance, there was no praying out loud. This is a downright lie. There is some low whispers the last few seconds before the ditch that might have been prayers. I don't know, I don't speak Arabic so I can't tell, but the crew was still flying at the time. There's absolutely nothing on the CVR that even with the most absurd degree of imagination could be indicative of quote-unquote panic. The flight crew warned the cabin 3 times in the past few minutes before the crash, in French and in English, brace for impact. The cabin crew, at least some of the passengers, would have understood the calls. Just listen to the CVR. The news stories are total crap. I can't comment on what the pilots could have and should have done to achieve a better outcome, but the captain and FO appear to have been trying to do their jobs given the extreme circumstances. I would not normally agree with CVR recordings being leaked like this, but I have been sucked into believing the Reuters BBC version about an unprofessional quote-unquote praying crew. Hearing it for myself, nothing could be farther from the truth. It's pretty clear that this crew is being royally shafted by whoever released the quote-unquote praying instead of flying version of the story, likely the Italian authorities. So, who are all these guys? Members of a forum called P-Prune. What is P-Prune? Well, none other than the Professional Pilots Rumour Network. the forum for professional commercial pilots to talk about issues involving aviation. All of these people are professional pilots with thousands and thousands of hours of flight experience on the clock between them. You see, this story caused a lot of controversy among airline pilots, believe it or not, when it first broke in 2009. This led to a thread being started here, with many pilots offering their professional opinions on what happened. If you want to watch Reption's arguments being torn to pieces by professionals, go and read the thread down below. It's quite hilarious to watch these people shit all over the praying pilot hypothesis. It's also worth mentioning that there was protests over the case by the International Federation of Airline Pilots, one of the largest organizations representing the commercial pilots around the world. Now, if you're going to accuse them of being a Christian or Muslim organization, then I'm afraid you're just plain bloody stupid. Now, as a final nail in the coffin, I have a 300+ page report from the ANSV, who are the Italian Air Authority who investigated the crash. What did they find? Well, after extensive investigation, they found that an incorrect fuel gauge was fitted to the plane. This meant that the pilot didn't know that the plane was out of fuel when the engine stopped running. In other words, the reason that the plane ditched into the sea was that they instead focused on trying to restart the engines instead of gliding the plane into the nearest airport and trying to get the maximum glide distance. They followed the procedures for an engine failure instead of procedures for running out of fuel, and this was the cause of the crash. It was not so much an accident, but a deliberate course of action taken by the pilot on the information that was available to him at the time, and he had just seconds to make this decision, and he chose the wrong one. The issue is that lives could have been saved if he took the right course of action instead of the one that he took. Now, the court case was something that happened separately from the investigation report. The court case was basically around how they didn't take these procedures anyway, so they are liable for all the deaths, whether or not they knew that they had run out of fuel or not, and that is exactly why they were convicted. Not for praying, not for negligence, but simply taking the wrong course of action. None of this involved religion in the slightest. All in all, the incident appears to be a relatively minor aircraft accident, well, less of an accident and more of an incident, without any other distinguishing features. Though it's interesting to note that in the huge report on the crash that was commissioned here, the words pray, prayer, God, Allah, atheism and religion do not come up even once. I wonder why. So in summary, the way in which the mainstream media, and by extension Mr. Reption, have portrayed this incident has been entirely inconsistent with the actual facts and findings about the crash itself. In other words, the example that Mr. Reption based his entire video on was sheer and utter claptrap crap. Now, one of the things I came across while reading the forums was speculation on why the issue was so skewed in the first place in the media. Well, the first thing is, of course, attention-grabbing headlines. Those are always one of the things that comes up when you're dealing with journalistic integrity or lack thereof. But the other speculation, which is much more interesting, is the idea that the Italian media has a pro-Catholic, pro-Christian bias and an anti-Muslim bias, and so this whole story could be the product of a religious feud, which was then latched onto by the mainstream media around the world, and then Mr. Reption all these years later. And if that little suspicion or theory is correct, then isn't it a little ironic that you have a piece of religious propaganda, essentially a religious fairy story, being used to attack religion? So now we have to get to the point of, what does all of this mean? Well, simply put, that Mr. Reption puts zero research or effort into his videos these days. And I'm sure there are many other videos of his that I could look at and find the exact same thing. He didn't even bother checking how recent the story he was talking about was. He didn't even bother looking beyond one person's opinion in an internet article. And for someone of his subscriber size, that is pretty disappointing. Of course, many people have accused him of this in the past, but now we have definitive proof. Him spreading misinformation from several years ago is objective facts. It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal. You would expect someone who earns as much money as he does off YouTube and has as many views and subscribers as he does to, at the very least,
back it the fuck up.
And if you think he has even a shred of credibility left, then I don't know what to tell you. Personally though, I think you should just skip the middleman and go straight to Wikipedia. As for the rest of that little video of his, the problem of evil is one of the most tired arguments for atheism in human history. Wake me up when you have a definitive answer to it and can prove that God doesn't exist, or failing that, give me a well-researched epistemic argument. I'm not holding my breath. Anyway, I've been Dangerous Analysis. Next video will be about something else entirely. More gaming journalism crap. Feel free to send me any links or articles or anything else you think needs investigating. I'll see you all when I make a new video. Thank you for subscribing. My website is hackboiler.net, and as always,
good night and good luck.